For this video, I'm going to talk about different lessons I learned from playing D&D. Like, as a new player, you shouldn't do this thing. As a DM, probably don't do this other thing. You know, stuff like that. I'm going to try to give advice, however this video is mostly just for entertainment. In the grand scheme of things, I'm still very new to D&D, so if you're here for quality assured D&D advice, then you should probably instead watch some old Dungeon Coach videos, or just watch Matthew Colville, the Superior Matthew. Now, before we get to my great value D&D advice, I'll quickly mention what made me want to play D&D in the first place. And immediately two things come to mind, those being the Dungeons and More Dungeon episode of Gravity Falls, and Your Realms Live. You know Gravity Falls is, great show, I don't need to explain that. And for Your Realms, I refuse to explain it. I still haven't recovered financially. I don't even like it anymore. I wasted so much money on that. So those were the main reasons why I wanted to play it, and those examples were probably where I first learned about D&D too. After it gained my interest, I got the starter set, and then I never used it. I glanced through it a few times and I definitely discussed playing it, but it seemed like a lot of work. Especially if I was going to be the Dungeon Master, and I just could not comprehend it. Even after I watched videos on D&D, I was still confused. I heard them say sentences like, your spell save DC is 8 plus your ability score modifier. Which ability score you use is pinned on your class. The wizard, for example, is a full caster that uses int as a primary ability score. And you lost me at 8 plus. Why do you have to get math involved? I'm not a math enjoyer. Take it slow. So I really just cannot even attempt to get into it. I did later watch a D&D series by Rustage, which got me even more interested, but I still just couldn't begin understanding or playing it. That was until I was finally able to play it in 2022, when an internet friend decided to DM a game of D&D for the first time. So I, and a bunch of people I at least vaguely knew, started making characters and getting ready to play. Now for the core of the video. From this point onward, I'm going to break it down a bit more, and explain different learning moments I had. And admittedly, I primarily learned through more negative experiences. I'm going to speak about some of my own mistakes, but at certain points I'm going to say some stuff which is a bit critical of the DM, but please note that if I tried to DM, I definitely wouldn't have done any better. Plus, I'm speaking in hindsight where it's a lot easier to point out certain issues. Full respect to the DM, no hate, it isn't easy and I respect the effort. Besides the third thing I'm going to mention, maybe a slightly extreme amount of playful hatred for that. Oh, by the way, I'm numbering all the piece of information I learned. I used numbers in my last video too. I've kind of been really into numbers recently. Not math though, still not a math enjoyer. So let's just jump into it. Number 1. Making a very unoptimized character. I made my first mistake when I decided to play a barbarian. I heard that barbarians were simple and beginner friendly, and that is true, but I quickly learned they're also incredibly boring. I know they can be cool and powerful, especially at earlier levels, but I thought it'd be cool if I was a detective barbarian. I still think this is a cool character concept and I wouldn't mind exploring again in the future. However, mechanically I made this character as a wisdom and charisma based barbarian, and this didn't work at all. I thought I'd be able to make it work, but my armor class was 11, and I was playing a human. Not a variant human. When I was making this character, the DM warned me about how unoptimized it was, but I thought it'd be cool so I did it anyway. And then several sessions down the line, after I realized my mistake, he did allow me to adjust my character a single time. So I made my character into a variant human after I learned what that was. I took the observant feat, and I slightly adjusted my ability scores. But by this point I was very hesitant to actually adjust my character in a significant way. I was a bit stubborn, but my mindset was, nah, my character's gonna become a great detective despite them being a barbarian. And from this experience I learned a ton of things. Firstly, if you're a DM, then follow my DM's example, and definitely warn new players if they're making something absurdly unoptimized. And if they ignore your warnings, I'd recommend throwing them a bone early on, just so they don't severely underperform. And if you're a new player, I'd recommend just listening to the DM's advice. Maybe tell them any character concepts that you have, and then ask them which class would fit your concept the best. And if you're a more experienced player, then you probably don't need advice from me, just go for it. Maybe you could ask your DM for a favor which would allow your weird concept to work better, or maybe you just find your own way of making your idea serviceable. For a detective barbarian, you could multiclass into rogue for expertise in investigation and perception. And then you could also recklessly attack for easier sneak attacks. See, that's serviceable. You can make any concept work. This experience really made me value optimizing, but primarily optimizing concepts. I have very little interest in making an optimized Twilight Cleric, but I do have an interest in making an optimized Mud Wizard. Number 2. Not communicating your plans. In the first combat of the campaign, we were fighting enemies that could teleport away, and my idea was to tie a rope to one of my hand axes and then throw the hand axe so it gets stuck inside the enemy. So then I could either teleport with them by holding the end of the rope, or maybe I could prevent their teleporting. Maybe through Rule of Cool that would have worked, but now I'll never know since I didn't realize I had rope on me. So I decided to have my character spend like 2 turns running to get rope. If I just told the DM my plan, it likely would have gone a lot smoother. And at the very least, it would have been informed that I had rope. So if you have a weird plan, you might as well just say it aloud. You have very little reason to keep the DM or the other players in the dark. If they're cool, they're usually going to work with you too. Number 3. I have no clue. For this next thing I learned, I'm going to be honest, I'm not fully sure what I learned from this, but listen to the story. Towards the end of session 1, I had my character approach an NPC and ask if they needed any detective work to be done. I thought it'd be a silly little thing, and maybe my character could get some gold on our downtime. But I then learned that the NPC I approached was a child. and my character was a shirtless barbarian. So the DM described it and said how they started calling for their mother or something, and then I say how my character runs away. Kinda funny little thing, not a big deal. Except this is now a running joke that is brought up in all future sessions. An NPC from across the realm will have heard of this, and make jokes about my character being a predator. It's the kind of thing where it's a little funny at first, but then it starts to feel like it's devaluing my character. It never had any actual ramifications, but the jokes felt like they were taking my character in a direction I didn't like. Now for the next story, which is vaguely related. My character was heavily injured from fighting goblins, so when we arrived at the carnival I asked this NPC if they had any healing, and the DM described it as them kissing one of my character's wounds to heal it, causing a blue scab to form. I don't know why, but them describing that created a blue scab oddly grossed me out. I was playing it after only getting like 2 hours of sleep, so maybe that's why. But the next day I decided to message the DM, just telling them to not have the scab be relevant because it grossed me out. So immediately, because I said that, he decided to have the scab be relevant. Apparently my character has clown herpes now. So, what I learned from those experiences is that, as a DM, you shouldn't do any of that. If a player isn't super keen on a joke about their character, probably drop it or at least say it less. And if a player specifically requests that you don't do something, then don't suddenly decide to do that thing. None of this was a massive deal, I kinda just ignored it and kept playing, but try to respect what the player wants for their character. I'm not the DM, but in the campaign I'm currently playing in, our party's tabaxi was able to recognize a party member's footprints, so we all made jokes about him examining people's feet. Then, a few days later, I decided to make the funniest joke yet created. In fact, I'm having an intermission just so you can read this joke. After creating the greatest joke of all time, I thought back to this experience, and decided to message him about it just to make sure he was fine with me making jokes about his character like this. And he basically just said that he's fine with it as long as it's joked about sparingly and doesn't define his character. So, my experience may have been beneficial since it potentially prevented a bad experience that could have happened in the future. I made another feet joke less than a month later, but trust me that I showed restraint. I never want to devalue anyone's character, and I know that now. So, thanks to my first DM for sort of teaching me this lesson, by treating my character like a predator and then giving them herpes. Why'd you do that, man? Number 4. Starting a session with nothing planned. I quickly learned that DMs should just cancel their games if they aren't prepared. I know some DMs are improv masters, but if you aren't a master then it's probably better to cancel. If your notes look like this, then please reschedule. Number 5. Getting too ambitious with character backstory. Originally my character's backstory was relatively simple, with some vague details that I knew I'd have to expand on later. But when I went to expand on it, I started writing, I thought to myself, okay, so my character's brother is the leader of a mafia family. Well, logically, he controls some powerful people. I'll write down the names of these high-ranking members. Actually, perhaps they all have unique ways of fighting too. I'll write that down. Actually they're a bit shallow. They all need backstories too. Actually, I'll need to specify their heights, weights, and blood types. But wait, I need to specify the names of some notable low-ranking members as well. Wait. Each of the 5 prominent members controls their own division, dealing with different aspects of crime. I need to specify which division controls what. I need to write down each character's opinion on one another. And the campaign ended before I finished writing my character's backstory. It was fun to write a lot of that, but I should have focused on the actually important parts. I essentially was just writing an entire D&D campaign worth of information that my DM might not even used. If you're writing 5 novels about characters that the character you're playing hasn't even met, then you need to chill. In the campaign I'm playing in currently, I only wrote 2 novels, and some footnotes about some side characters. And it's worked out so far, so do that. Number 6. Not having a 20 means something. I've seen a surprising amount of people disagree with this online, but if a 20 isn't enough to succeed, then I don't think a dice should be rolled. I understand that for skill checks, a 20 is not an auto success, but why should a DM have a player roll if it isn't possible? I know there are situations like, oh, one of my players tried to eat the sun using animal handling. I'm not gonna let them succeed even though they rolled a 20. Which I completely understand. Animal handling will be used to tame the sun, not eat it. So you can't allow them to succeed even on a 20. But I don't think you should have even allowed the player to roll in the first place. But let's say you're in a situation where a player insists that they roll, or they say that their character has already done something and they're committed to rolling for it. I think some DMs would handle this by thinking to themselves, okay, they obviously can't succeed at this, but I'll let them roll anyway, and if they roll high, I'll have a less bad outcome happen. Or I'll have them fail, but some other thing happens. And that is a fine way of handling it, But in that scenario, I think the DM should clearly communicate whatever the intent is for the role. Otherwise, the player's probably going to end up being disappointed when I roll a 20 and the sun remains uneaten. Number 7. Excluding players from hearing conversations. As a DM, if a player character is talking to an NPC away from the other player characters, or if they notice something that no other player character would notice, the other players shouldn't be excluded from hearing it. I think sometimes it can be justified. Maybe some piece of lore related to the player character's backstory becomes relevant, and the DM wants the player to choose if they reveal it or not. But outside of rare occasions, I'd recommend against it. It's unfun having random intermissions where people secretly talk about stuff. It's not like I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh, the DM is talking to our druid privately. Heck yeah, time for another TikTok break. I watched 30 TikToks in a row last session. Funnest session we've had in months. Let's go. Now theoretically, private conversations can stop players from metagaming, whether intentionally or unintentionally. For example, recently in the campaign I'm currently playing in, one player accidentally started talking about stuff in character that their character most likely shouldn't have known about. So we ended up pausing the roleplay for a minute to discuss whether their character would have known about it. This issue could have been solved if the player didn't have any meta knowledge. But still don't do it. You can just correct players and have a short conversation whenever they have a slip up like that. No one should have to be forced to take a TikTok break. Number 8. Rats. 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 Our party went down into the sewers to deal with some giant rats. And initially we ended up having a really intense combat fighting them off. The highlight of this encounter was probably when my character was partially separated from the other party members and had to make a jump over some sewer water. Otherwise my character probably would have been killed by the giant rats. The combat might have gone slightly long, but I thought the threat of death was fun and I enjoyed that intensity. After we got through the first combat, I believe we got a short rest in, and then we walked into the next room and more giant rats started showing up. It was another combat of us fighting a ton of giant rats. Except this time we were kinda just in the room and I felt no real threat of death. Then after defeating that encounter, a ton more giant rats showed up. Then I started to question my existence. To be fair, in the third rat encounter there were secretly like 2 special rats, and if they died, the other rats died too, I believe. But I couldn't tell the difference and I'd lost interest by then. Each combat probably had like at least 8 giant rats, and I felt like I couldn't do anything besides move, rage, and recklessly attack. During the second or third rat combat, my rage ended, by the way. Not because I was knocked unconscious or didn't attack or whatever. It ended because our druid added up the rounds and mentioned how a minute would have passed by now. In D&D, when something says that will last a minute, it's generally assumed that will last for a whole combat. Not in this case, the rats were too much. I think some of my frustration ties back to my character being so unoptimized, but I think this was an issue with the encounters too. It's not fun having a ton of the same enemy just spend their turns moving and attacking, and it's especially unfun having 3 encounters in a row that feel essentially the same. I don't think there's anything truly wrong with having some simple encounters where you just fight a regular animal or something basic. Not every fight has to be crazy, but if you're essentially just repeating the same encounter multiple times in the same session, then I think it's time to get crazy and creative. Try to mix it up. If you're doing stuff with rats, maybe there's a lake of sewage water that rats swim in, and they'll leap out of the water and attack anyone that accidentally disturbs them while trying to cross the lake. Or introduce some special rats that shoot acid. Maybe an alchemist poured some old potions down into the sewers, and now the rats have crazy powers. Maybe it's a boss fight and the Great Rat King shows up. I don't know, I'm sure you're creative, you can come up with something cool. Whether it be a unique enemy or just a regular enemy placed in a cool environment that changes up the battle. Also, if you have a lot of enemies, try to be quick with their turns. That's easier said than done, but if a player is thinking to themselves, man, I really should have taken a movie break, a TikTok break isn't enough, then there's probably an issue. Number 9. Crocodile. In my last video I used numbers too, but only up to 8. But this time I thought to myself, I've been really into numbers recently, so why not be ambitious? So I'm adding a +1 and covering a 9th thing. I know +1 is technically math, and I previously mentioned how I'm not a math enjoyer, but I'm fine with it since it's simple math. Like how the greatness of part 4 spreads to yonder is enhancing their greatness even further. Simple stuff like that is fine, but 8+ is taking it too far. But on to the main topic. You see, throughout most of this video I've been talking about the first D&D campaign I played in, but now I'll talk about an experience from the second one, the one I'm currently playing in. All new DM, all new players, besides me obviously, all new learning experiences. I'm going to be talking about a situation that happened, and I'm not going to say who was in the right or who was wrong, that's not the point. Regardless, I think something can be learned from it. But first, a disclaimer. Originally this section was over 2,000 words long since I wanted to make sure the whole situation was explained. However, I realized that was a bit too long. It was a tough decision to make since I never miss with the content I make. Besides these videos, maybe slight misses, however outside those I never miss. But I reluctantly decided to cut the original script for this section and just redo this part at a quicker pace. Maybe in the future for one of this video's anniversaries I could release the special edition where I had the original scene in along with a bunch of cool aliens and stuff, but for now I'm streamlining it. It's a bit more casual of a section now too. So, me and the party were fighting a huge crocodile. I thought it'd be cool to try to intimidate it by glaring at it, sort of like Shanks from One Piece. The DM said it wasn't gonna work, but he let me roll for it as a free action. I rolled a nat 20 for a total of 28, and I got so hyped. Then he said that nothing happened. I then tried to argue my point by explaining One Piece, but he decided to skip my turn just to keep the pace of the session going, and then someone else got the kill right after. The main issue I had with this ruling ties back to what I talked about in number 6, where if something isn't possible I don't think should be rolled for. The DM did clearly say that wasn't going to work, but I still thought it'd work on a 20 and I got very disappointed. A few days later I decided to just send the DM a large message, explaining all the reasons why I was disappointed in this ruling. I was basically like, man, it's not like I'm trying to eat the sun, the crocodile died right after anyway. It would have been a cool moment, it makes narrative sense with my character, why did you let me roll for it in the first place, and why did you punish me just because I flavored it weirdly? A few days passed and he still hadn't responded, but I ended up casually joining a call with him and some of the boys. So I just asked him like, hey, have you read my message yet? And he basically responded with something along the lines of, I hate when you get like this, I would have been more lenient but you sent me an entire novel. And him saying that absolutely destroyed me. I was stunned. I took massive psychic damage from that. It was crazy. Eventually, maybe a week later, we finally agreed to talk to each other on a call. He explained that he didn't mean to be rude. He originally interpreted my large message as being like a Twitter call-out post, and he agreed to be more lenient in the future. And over time, he definitely has grown to be more lenient, with him allowing my character to do more weird or creative stuff. Although I'm gonna be honest, even after that conversation, I realized I still wasn't completely satisfied. Only a few weeks later I was thinking to myself like, that wasn't even a proper apology, he didn't really make it up to me, he had bad faith in me, or, oh, I should have brought up this other thing. He set expectations badly here, he was unfair this other time too and that wasn't addressed, and so on. And even more recently it sometimes annoys me. Like I'll say my catchphrase, see you later alligator, and then when someone responds, after a while crocodile, I grit my teeth in anger. However, it's important to not let stuff in the past ruin the fun you're having currently. I think that's one of the things you can take away from this. I'm having a lot of fun in the campaign, especially recently. Like, I'm actively excited for the next session as I'm saying this. Sure, there's maybe the occasional thing that bugs me still, but my DM is great most of the time. This is dangerously close to just becoming general life advice, but try not to hold grudges over stuff that's now irrelevant. For example, getting a bit off topic now, but recently someone I hadn't talked to in a long time saw me in the game and started talking to me. And I was thinking like, ew, this person's trying to be friendly with me? After what they said to me 3 years ago? This fiend. So my advice for this is, don't be like me basically. It's tough, but try to chill out. Of course, I don't know what situation you might be in. Maybe the person you're playing a game with is just actually evil. Like maybe they broke your legs, killed your family members, ate your son. I don't know. But of course, in those cases, you should probably just stop talking to that person. Games are for enjoyment, so if you aren't having fun, you should probably just quit. I think there's a lot more wisdom you can get from this situation. But I already passed 1,000 words and I said the main points. So that concludes the crocodile section. Hopefully you found this entertaining. Several times while I was working on this video, I thought about scrapping it just because I was worried that either no one was going to get value from this video, or that it'd be really awkward if certain people watched it. But then I realized, I get like 50 views per video, plus I just made a video titled Why Yanderis Are Great. Like seriously, since when have I cared about value, awkwardness, or the consequences of my actions? But yeah, that's it. I hope this didn't come off as being hateful towards my DMs. I'd consider both of them to be my friends still. And honestly, some of the issues I talked about in this video kinda looped back around and became funny again. Soon I'll have issues with the whole animal kingdom. But anyway, see you later, alligator.